You might be surprised to hear that pianos are typically considered both percussion and string instruments, because the sound is made by hitting strings with hammers. The question, how does a piano work, is a little misleading, since there are different types of pianos, and each of them works slightly differently. However, the principles of how sound is made by hitting strings is the same. In this video, we'll be focusing on the grand piano. First, let's look at how strings can create sounds. Each key on a piano plays a different note, and is linked to a different string. When you press a key and a piano string is hit by a hammer, the string vibrates. This causes the air around the string to vibrate as well, and our ears detect this vibration as sound. The pitch of the note that we hear, that is, how high or low the note sounds, depends on the frequency that the string vibrates at. For example, a string that vibrates 440 times per second produces an A. A string vibrating at a lower frequency produces a lower note. For example, the G that is a tone below this A is produced by a string vibrating 392 times per second. So what makes a string vibrate at a particular frequency and produce a particular note? The frequency a string vibrates at depends on the string's length and its diameter. Longer strings vibrate more slowly than shorter strings, and thicker strings vibrate more slowly than thinner strings. So, shorter and thinner strings produce higher notes than longer and thicker strings. In a piano, there are strings of different lengths to produce different notes. That's why the left side of the piano, which is where the low notes are, is so much longer than the right side, where the high notes are. The low notes have longer strings than the high notes. However, piano also changes the diameter of the strings. The lower notes have thicker strings than the higher notes. If the lowest notes on the piano had the same diameter as the highest notes, they would have to be much longer than they actually are to produce the right notes. You can change the volume of the note by pressing the key harder or more gently. When you press the key harder, the hammer hits the string with more energy, and the string vibrates with a higher amplitude. It doesn't change how quickly the string vibrates, but it makes the air around the string move more, which we perceive as a louder sound. Thin strings are quieter than thick strings, so the high notes on a piano are quieter than the low notes. To help make the difference in volume between high and low notes smaller, high notes have 2 or 3 strings per note, whereas low notes only have 1. For keys that have 2 or 3 strings, the hammer strikes all of them at the same time. In a piano, the sound that's made when you press keys and hit strings with hammers is amplified by the soundboard. When a string is hit and vibrates, it causes the soundboard to vibrate as well. This makes more air move, which makes it sound louder than if only the string vibrated. Without a soundboard, the piano would be much quieter, and you wouldn't be able to hear it very well. Usually, when you cause a string to vibrate, such as by hitting it, it will keep producing sound until the string has lost all of its energy and stopped vibrating. But when you play piano, you need to be able to control exactly how long the note is heard for. You don't want to wait until the string stops vibrating by itself. Each piano note has a part called a damper that sits on top of the string. When you press the key, the damper moves up away from the string so that the string can vibrate freely and produce a sound. When you stop pressing a key, the damper moves back to its original position and presses the string, which stops the string from vibrating and stops the sound. Now that we've looked at the basics of how a piano hits strings to produce sound, let's look at how pressing a key makes a hammer hit a string. At a very simplified level, the key is one end of a lever. When you press the key down, the other end of the lever moves up and moves both the hammer and the damper up at the same time. The damper moves off the string and the hammer hits the string. The string vibrates and makes a sound. When you release the key, the damper presses against the string and stops it from vibrating, and the sound stops. This diagram is very simplified. In reality, it's a little more complicated. There are over 100 parts in each key. This is what the mechanism actually looks like for one key. You can see the piano key, the hammer, the string, and the damper. The other parts make it possible to play the same note several times in a row quickly. We won't go into the mechanics of how that's possible in this video. You might have noticed that pianos have 2 or 3 pedals near the floor. Each pedal changes the sound of the piano in a different way when it's pressed down. The piano player presses these pedals with their feet while they're playing to change the sound in these different ways. The pedal on the right is the most commonly used pedal. When you press this pedal down, all the dampers in the piano for every key are lifted up and held above the strings. How do you think this changes the sound of the piano? Remember that the purpose of the damper is to stop the string from sounding when it is pressed on top of the string. Think about how the string will stop vibrating if the damper is lifted up. The correct answer is that when you play a note, it keeps sounding even after you release the key. This is because when the pedal is pressed down and all the dampers are lifted off the strings, the damper doesn't touch the string and stop it from vibrating when the key is released, so the note continues to sound. Releasing the pedal will move the dampers back to their default position, touching the strings and stopping the sound. The pianist uses this pedal to make the music flow more smoothly by preventing gaps between notes when you move your hand between keys, and to make the sound quality more resonant. The left pedal on the piano shifts the hammers slightly to one side. This means that for notes that have 2 or 3 strings, the hammer does not hit all the strings. For the lower notes that only have 1 string, the hammer hits the string on one side instead of in the center. How do you think this changes the sound? The correct answer is that when a pedal is pressed down, the piano sounds quieter. For the higher notes with 2 or 3 strings, this is because fewer strings are hit, so less air vibrates and there is less sound. For the lower notes, this is because the hammer doesn't hit the string in the center, so the string doesn't vibrate as strongly and doesn't produce as much sound. The pedal also changes the sound quality to have a gentler, less bright tone. Different pianos have different functions for the middle pedal. A common function is to make all of the keys sound quieter so that you can practice more quietly. We won't get into the details of how this works or what other possible functions of the middle pedal are in this video. So, to recap, when you press a piano key, the hammer hits the string at the same time that the damper is lifted off the string. This causes the string to vibrate and make sound. When you release the key, the damper is replaced on the string and stops the string from vibrating, and the sound stops. Keys that have longer and thicker strings play lower notes than keys that have shorter and thinner strings. You can play more loudly by pressing the keys with more force. The right pedal on the piano makes notes keep sounding even when the key is released by lifting dampers off the strings. The left pedal makes the sound quieter by shifting the hammers to the side so they don't hit all the strings or don't hit the string in the center.